Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, glad you're back on the Investigative Journal. Greg Anthony here on this February 13th, 2017 day on our calendar. And let's start off with a couple Jesuit quotes of the day. The first comes from Pope Francis. These are more subtle quotes, but I think you'll get my point. The Jesuits, he says, has a vow to obey the Pope. But if the Pope is a Jesuit, like him, okay, maybe he should have a vow to obey the superior general. I feel like I'm still a Jesuit in terms of my spirituality. What I have in my heart is what I mean. Now, what does Pope Francis have in his heart? Well, let me explain, and I'm going to give you a great analogy. During one of the presidential debates, Donald Trump said something to Hillary Clinton when they were fighting back and forth that I think swayed the election in his favor. And he stated this. He looked at Hillary, and she was talking about her big heart and all of the things she's done for women. Trump looked at her and said, "You have hatred in your heart." And he was meaning hatred towards the American people. And that proved to be true because sometime right after that, she was talking about this basket of deplorables, putting most or all of Trump's people into what she called a basket of deplorable people, which basically lost the election for her. So I'd like to say that what's in Pope Francis's heart is hatred, not love. And we're going to start the show off, after I give you a couple more quotes, with an outline of how this really works, how their control really works, where it starts, and then working our way down to really important stories today. Okay, now, we all know who Michael Moore is, right? Michael Moore, that leftist activist. Here's a quote he stated. He said, "I'm a flawed individual, as we all are. And because I was raised by Jesuits, I'm constantly what is it about me, and what can I do better?" And Michael Moore is Jesuit. Isn't it interesting? You find them under any rock, every person. Interesting. And what's he trying to do better? He's trying to figure out how to deceive you in a better way, how to play the Hegelian dialectic in a better way. And he's doing a pretty good job of it, isn't he? Now, let's look at this quote here. This is by Umberto Eco, and he stated that Dan Brown is a character from Foucault's Pendulum. I invented him, so he's a good writer. He shares my character's fascinations, the world conspiracy of Rosicrucians, Masons, and Jesuits, the role of the Knights Templar, the Hermetic secret, the principle that everything is connected. I suspect Dan Brown might not even exist. Interesting quotes of the day on the Investigative Journal. Okay, let's try to get all the confusion and all of the chaos that's going on in the world today out of our minds and out of our thoughts today, and really put things into a proper perspective. And I'm going to ask you the question, when did you first realize that the Jesuit order and the Vatican were the head of the all the conspiracy theories, and I put that in quotes, that you've ever heard of in your life? And if you realize that, try to pinpoint when you first started researching it and how you came to that conclusion and where you're at today. And if you haven't come to that conclusion, please indulge me for this hour so I can kind of show you where we're coming from, because it's based a lot on fact. And, of course, circumstantial evidence has to be brought into the picture, because on cases when you're talking about secret societies such as we are talking about today, the Jesuits being one of the most secretive. It's hard to trace every one of their steps, so you've got to use a little bit of deductive reasoning and a little bit of common sense. So people always ask me, when did you first realize the Jesuits and the Vatican were behind the diplomatic relations of our country, behind our domestic and foreign policy, and actually control the major heads of state of the world? And I said, well, it started off pretty innocently when I was working as a journalist in Rome. I may say a mainstream journalist. And I believed hook, line, and sinker, the story of America the Great, America fighting for peace and democracy. And in fact, at the time when I went to Rome in the early 80s, I was a liberal, I guess. Most of my ideas were liberal. And came there as an atheist, falling away from Catholicism. And as I began to listen to the news and talk to people, many people in Italy, regarding what really is going on, I began to have different ideas. My belief system began to be broken a bit, and I started researching things. But I remember the real moment that I really started to think in these terms, that there's a hidden force behind what's going on in the world. And this has been going on for a long time, and the Vatican and the Jesuits were a major part, was when I was sitting one day, innocently having a cup of coffee, reading a book called The Messianic Legacy. Now that book came out in the late 70s, I believe, and I read it from cover to cover and was fascinated by it. And what it proposed was that Christ didn't die on the cross, and that he actually fled to France and was married, had children, and I believe in the book they were saying he was married to Mary Magdalene, and they scurried away, never were killed, and his bloodline lived on. And I started thinking, as an atheist at the time, I kind of agreed with it. I said, of course, this is a crazy idea, what Christianity is all about. But I was thinking, I was doing all these boring stories at the time, covering the Pope's Wednesday. Every Wednesday he used to come out and give a little speech, and I used to cover that. And then a couple of other real, touristy stories. What can you do in 24 hours in Rome? Stories like that. So I started thinking, by the way, I used to do a lot of political stories, so I had to read the Italian newspapers, translate, and then write stories, and hopefully some get sent over to the States. Okay, so I'm thinking to myself, well, there's more to life than what I'm doing here. I mean, there's more to life than just these stupid stories I'm doing. Why don't I try to find out if this is true? Wouldn't that be interesting? If I could find out and talk to a man who is of the bloodline of Christ, then maybe I could, break a great story. So in the book, it said that the bloodline continues through a group. Now this, for you conspiracy theorists, you've probably heard of this by now if you've seen Angels and Demons and all the books that Dan Brown, a Jesuit, writes. The Priori de Sion. And there was a Monsieur Jacques Picard, who was supposedly the man who was the head of this organization that carried the bloodline of Christ. And so I got on a train and went to Paris, where the office was supposed to be, and found out there was no office, and that I remember telling you about the little meeting I had. I knocked on the door. Nobody answered. Then a lady came to the door and said, no organization like this exists here. And I said, well, it says this in the book here. And they go, well, there must be a mistake. So I never could find that organization. And when I went back to Rome, I did some checking. And to make a long story short, after about 2 or 3 years of doing all this stuff and doing other stories and getting more information regarding the Vatican's illicit affairs and the Vatican bank scandal, their connection to the mafia, Freemasonry, and all of these things which started to build up in my belief system started to be shattered one by one. Everything I ever believed about the Catholic Church was going down the drain. I also found out that the Jesuits were 99% behind the authors of this book, who happened to be Freemasons from England. And also, a lot of the little things they said they discovered in libraries were placed in the libraries by the Jesuits. So basically, the Jesuits planted this story. And I said, well, why would they do something like this? And then I said the Hegelian dialectic. Create chaos. Create the problem. So what they were doing was trying to destroy Christianity, their main goal. Now they're doing it even today. They're doing the same thing, right? Through ISIS. We show you the Jesuit connection of ISIS. We show you most everything in this kind of Hegelian dialectic frame. So that's when I first started to figure it out. And that was years and years ago. And I even sat down with it was kind of a semi-high level bishop who I discussed this with. And I believe it was I'm not sure if it was a bishop or a high level priest. But we discussed it, and he said the people can't handle the truth. And he kind of laughed, and I could never get him to admit that what I was saying was true about the planting of these documents, because he said, well, yes, this group comes and blackmails the Vatican for money every so often. And I asked him, I said, well, I heard the Jesuits were behind this. And he wouldn't give me an answer, but I could tell by his body language and his eyes that I was on the right path. And so ever since 9/11, folks, I've been trying to bring, maybe a couple of years after 9/11, on the alternative media, trying to bring this story to people, that the Vatican and Jesuits are really to be reckoned with and are in control of basically the fate of you, your family, and everything else, even to this day, for one reason. And I always like to make it simple, to form a one-world government as best as they can for control by eliminating millions of people to make it easier, and to a one-world religion. That's why you're seeing all the chaos in the Catholic Church. They have to destroy that as well. So that is my main theory. And you know something, the more and more I research it, the more I find that it's something that I'd love people to research on their own. That's why I do this show for the better part of 10 to 15 years. And I do it here because you can't get this on the mainstream, because they're all controlled by the people that we talk about. Now, over the years, there have been many books and treatises on conspiracy theory of history. And it's difficult to find really any two of them that agree, right? Some say the behind the scenes are this Illuminati. Even Dan Brown in his movie tried to talk about that, right? That was Angels and Demons, and he pitted the evil Illuminati against the good Vatican. And what I basically say about that movie, it's ass backwards, because the Vatican is the Illuminati. And others say it's the Jews. I remember when I first started broadcasting and bringing the Jesuit Vatican message to people, I was countered by the radio stations I were on, by people they bring on that said, no, it's the Jews, not the Vatican, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, these organizations blamed for controlling the conspiracy at the highest levels are the Council on Foreign Relations, the Committee of 300, the Mafia, the Round Table, the Club of Rome, the Freemasons, the CIA, FBI, Mossad, and all these other secret societies, Rosicrucians, etc. Now, of course, all of these, the New World Order, as we call it, really is an old world order, includes all these groups, but they have a kind of secretive, tight-knit way of sticking together for one purpose. And that's what I like to get at here. Now, what I'd like to mention to you is that it's really interesting when you start to talk to people regarding this subject. And so let me bring you up to date. Just a day ago, I met a guy that I know very well, and he's a Trump supporter to the hilt. And so we started talking about Trump and what's going on as far as illegal immigration, etc., etc. And I tried to, basically I stated earlier that if I forgot about the control, the orchestration of wars, and if everything was as they say it is, I definitely would fall into the conservative category. So, like I said, I talked as if I was a Trump supporter myself with him, and I was trying to smoothly bring in the fact that the Vatican controls our top presidents. And when I was trying to get to that point, he immediately stated, but Trump isn't involved in this. He's above this. He's fighting the Pope. And I stopped there because at that point, I realized if I got any farther, it would not penetrate where this man was yet with his belief system regarding this subject. So I just left it at that. So when you look at this in those terms, you have to start saying something to yourself. And I want to lead this into the number of things I want to do quickly in the next, I got 8 minutes here and then another half hour. And I want to ask you this question. Where does it all begin? And start thinking in these terms. Have you noticed all of these occult symbols in Washington? All of these occult symbols, we've brought them to you, ISIS, all of the things that you start looking at that start talking about paganism, when you start looking at the obelisks in Rome and in the Washington, D.C. and London. And then you start seeing all this kind of satanic worshiping in the media, in the music profession, in videos, at the Super Bowl halftime shows. All of these occult symbols coming out, the hook 'em horns. You're seeing it all over the place. This worship of Lucifer. And did you ever wonder where it really starts? And so what I want to do is present to you quickly. I believe it starts in the Vatican. Now, the Pope is being worshipped as if he's a god, right? If he's the leader of the world. He comes, he speaks to our Congress, he speaks to the UN, he speaks at the Super Bowl. He's constantly in the forefront of everything. And like I mentioned earlier, Trump is battling on the other side through Cardinal Burke, who has a conservative group of traditional Catholics wanting to oust Pope Francis in Rome, and we talked about that. So we're seeing this kind of Hegelian dialectic play out. We're seeing now all of the countries of the West starting to free themselves of the bonds of this one world order kind of thing, don't we? We see Brexit, we see Trump in this nationalist movement, we see him aligning now with Japan, see him aligning today. He's meeting with Trudeau of Canada, and it's almost as if and he met with the British Prime Minister. It's almost as if the West is forming a coalition against who? China. I hit something. Yeah, China, the Middle East, etc. And it's almost as if, like I said earlier, within 5 years, I feel there'll be a major conflict. And everything adds up to that, including the depletion of our military. If you look at how depleted it is, and I think I'll start this in the next half hour so that I can run right through it. But if you look at the depletion of our military, the facts coming out now, over half of our fighter planes can't even fly. Our Navy is at the lowest it's ever been since World War I. We're undermanned in our Army by So if I was like controlling or orchestrating the next war, you got to have a powder keg moment, kind of like another Pearl Harbor. And then, of course, China and all of its allies they'd probably want to attack before we build up our military, right? Trump is in the process of doing that. Now, if this is orchestrated, something has to give. And that's why I mentioned that, look, we are only 5 years away. And I saw a little clip, and I thought I might play it now if I can find it. Let me look for it, which shows China's actually doing now, building, setting off missiles and targeting certain strategic areas that they've mapped out, and kind of have a battlefield in China where they're actually lobbing ballistic missiles at some of our targets as we speak. And let's see if I can find that. Okay, I can't find that clip, but anyway, I can just summarize it. Basically, China's testing, and they're using actual simulation of where some of our ships are, where some of our strategic bases are in Japan, etc. And we know that this buildup of possible Third World War would include the Middle East, because China and Russia are behind Iran, etc., North Korea. And then we have this kind of front going, this two-front area, Middle East, Obama giving millions and billions of dollars because he's basically propping up Islam against America. So we're up against a big, huge enemy right now. And I believe the orchestrators of war have something big planned. And let's go to a book, and let's finish it this way. This is even better. Let's go to a book called Descent into Slavery. And it stated this. This is from that book. The plan was outlined in graphic detail by Albert Pike, the sovereign Grand Commander of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry and the top illuminist in America, in a letter to Giuseppe Mazzini, dated August 15, 1871. And he states this: knowing what we know, and by the way, Pike has a huge statue of himself in Washington. So, knowing what we know, and this letter was also in a museum of history in London till certain internets or journalists found it, and then it was taken out. Now they say it's a hoax. But anyway, here we go. Knowing what we know about the Illuminati, Albert Pike was speaking as one who understood the Jesuit plan for the world dominion to bring everything back into the Pope's hands. Pike was the top Illuminist Jesuit in America. Pike stated, and this is from Descent into Slavery, that the First World War was to be fomented in order to destroy the Tsarist Russia and to place the vast land under the direct control of the Illuminati agents. Russia was then to be used as a boogeyman to further aims of the Illuminati world. In other words, the Jesuits gained control of Russia near the end of World War I. World War II was to be fomented through manipulation of the differences that existed between the German nationalists and political Zionists. This was to result in the expansion of Russian influence and the establishment of the State of Israel in Palestine. In both instances, Pike's plan for world wars has been precisely carried out. These plans existed 40 to 60 years before the wars took place. The Third World War was planned to result from the differences stirred up by the Illuminati agents between the Zionists and the Arabs. The conflict was planned to spread worldwide. And this was from Des Griffin, Descent into Slavery, printed by Emissary Publications, page 38 and 39. So Pike shows that the quote that the Jesuits are planning for a Third World War in the Middle East are those who are pro-Israel, like the United States and Great Britain. So this alignment is taking place as we speak. And isn't it interesting that now the Jesuits have put in a hawk, like Trump, to engage these forces that Obama has kind of built up, correct? So we have a huge problem, and I'm just trying to sort it out along with you on the Investigative Journal. We'll come back with the real story in the next half hour, back in 3 minutes.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal on this February 13th, 2017 day on our calendar. Go to my website at arcticbeacon.com and you can get shows going back, over a decade or more regarding the Vatican-led New World Order, all its tentacles, everything about it. And my question to you right now, we're trying to get to the bottom of things, or maybe to the top of the ladder here. Who really controls all this stuff? And I made the statement very quickly that it's no secret that our leaders, the leaders of the world, place the Pope of Rome on a high pedestal, worship him as a god, say nothing but good things about this man. He speaks at the Super Bowl. He gets on the air and states that we have to accept all of these immigrants because God says so, because I am God. And he comes to Congress and makes a speech. He's basically, never before have I ever seen something like this, and I've been around a while. And going back to Kennedy, Kennedy once said that the Pope should never have any influence in our government. And he was killed. Well, I can make the premise. Let's look at who this guy really is, what he really worships, and then work our way down. And you'll see that the leaders of the world worship the same thing. And then it works its way all the way down to Hollywood and all of the dark little secrets that they don't want you to know about. But I've said a long time ago, and many people that have looked at the Bible said Rome and the Pope are the whore of Babylon. On April 27, 2014, in St. Peter's Square, this ceremony was held to induct 2 former popes into sainthood, but there was another announcement made, a declaration to the world. The Pope broadcasted this in 3D, HD, 4K. The entire world had the ability to see this, but why go through this trouble? Why did the Pope want the world to see this? Ask yourself that. And in the background you hear this song, his flames donning his own creation. They're singing the opening of the ceremony. His flames donning the opening of creation. May I say, O Lucifer, who I know no setting. This is being done in Latin. Christ, your Son, who came back from the dead and shed his peaceful light to the human race. This is being stated at a huge Catholic ceremony for millions to see, and is alive and reigns forever and ever. Wow. They will say Amen. Is that Amen-Ra? You know who that is. We've talked about that. Did you catch that? Did you really catch that, folks? What he really said? Lucifer was declared God in front of everyone to see. Who is Lucifer anyway, and why should we even care? The Bible tells us exactly who Lucifer is. How art thou fallen from heaven? Listen to this. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend high above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So the Bible is telling us, that's in Isaiah 14:12, who Lucifer really is. So what do we have in that ceremony? We're, presenting these 2 new saints, so to speak. What did we have? We had the Pope declaring he worships Lucifer. And Lucifer's none other than Satan himself. Lucifer is the Latinized version of his biblical name, Halo, which means, you know what it means. This is the beginning of the declaration started with, his flame, remember? And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. That's in Corinthians. And basically, Lucifer is the fallen angel created by God. His name became Satan, which means adversary. Don't be deceived by those who call him God. And the main character who calls him God is who? The Pope. Now, I'm asking you, look into this for yourself, so you may know what is really going on inside the Vatican. Now, a lot of us, like me, come from Catholicism. Many still belong to it. And I hope that information that was presented is helpful to understand this, that the Pope worships Lucifer. Otherwise, they wouldn't have said that at the beginning of that most important ceremony that was broadcast to millions across the world. Now, they did it, why? In Latin, correct? Now, it doesn't matter. They're not going to come out and say, I worship Lucifer. And I remember a comment, somebody, when I brought this up to somebody in a private conversation, the person who was a Catholic said, well, I've never heard anybody state that they worship Lucifer. And I said, I was a Catholic for years and I never heard that either, but they do it in symbols. For example, do you ever see the inverted cross, the upside down cross? That's a symbol of the Antichrist. It's not a ridiculous mistake. And there's a hidden meaning to that, and there's many of these. And they shove it in your face, but no one has eyes to see. That is the real key to this whole story. Now, let's look at something else. Once you make the determination like I said, I want to get away from the chaos, away from the confusion, that the Pope is exalted by the highest leaders of our country, including the President, correct, and the leaders of the world. Now, who does he worship? We've shown you he worships Lucifer. Now, if they exalt him as the high leader, don't they worship the same? Well, of course, yes. And that's why you see the media inundated with Hollywood references, and you see all the satanic and the Luciferian symbols that come out in music, in rap, at the halftime shows of the Super Bowl, everything. And you wonder why. Because the head man worships Lucifer, and it trickles down to the world leaders. And let's start there. Okay, it is a sobering thought to think that the presidents of the United States are controlled by the Jesuits and the Vatican. And like that conversation I had the other day with a friend of mine, it's hard to get through to people. But let me look at the three presidents, Bush 43, Obama, and now Trump. Bush was there, right. The Pearl Harbor happened. Remember 9/11? He allowed that to happen and basically got us into the conflict. And his role was to start the conflict, to have that Pearl Harbor moment, which took away a lot of our rights, the Patriot Act, etc. That was written at Georgetown Jesuit University prior to 9/11. So Bush's role was to begin the whole conflict, correct? Then we bring in Obama, a Jesuit shill, and what was his role? Now, first of all, Bush should be considered a traitor, right? But he was exalted and still is today. Secondly, why did they bring in Obama? Every possible thing he did was to destroy America from within and also to embolden the enemy overseas, in Iran, in China, etc. Now, I'm going to go even back to Clinton. Clinton's major role was to give all of our technologies and assets and things to China. And if you look at the connections of the Clintons to China, it started there. But what happened? Obama now is allowing the enemy to grow even stronger by weakening America, setting us up for the kill. Now what do we have? We have the nationalist Trump being selected to now fight back in every possible way. And you know he has an itchy trigger finger, so to speak. Not that he wants to engage the enemy, excuse me, or start a conflict, but he's not going to back down. So all we need is a powder keg moment. And boy, we are in that World War III that I'm talking about. And if you look at how Jesuits have orchestrated every single war that we have been in, and we've done it on this show meticulously, you see that they're doing it all over again. And go back to some of my old shows. Now, so we've now taken away the confusion, showed you who their boss, the presidents and the leaders of the world, how they worship the Pope, who worships Lucifer, so they must worship Lucifer as well. And through Freemasonry or the worship of Allah or whatever they do, you can see that there's a connection. So let's take away the mystery. Let's take away this idea that they're not in control if you start to understand what really is going on. And all I'm asking you is to research it. So we work our way down. Who's the next on the ladder that they have to get either under their control or get rid of? Just like they'll get rid of a top leader if they don't play ball with them or they don't fit into the scheme of the New World Orders, one world government, one world religion. They have to get rid of the preachers. They have to get rid of Christianity. They have to get rid of America. And the best way is to silence or to take over ministers and preachers who have fought against them. Now, throughout the centuries, you see, since the Protestant Reformation, Rome's goal and the Jesuits' goal was to destroy Protestants. They are doing it today. And let me show you through a story that I've been covering for over a decade how they do it. Now, I have talked about the Tony Alamo ministry. They've preached since, God knows, for 40 years. The same thing I talk about, teaching people not only the Bible in the Word of God and how the Vatican is talked about in the book of Revelations as the Whore of Babylon, but also Tony the preacher, he went farther and started showing you how they control our government, how they were involved in our foreign and domestic affairs, and he wasn't afraid to talk about it and sent millions and millions of brochures around. Now, over the years, they've persecuted this ministry. They put him in jail in the 90s. They took away all their property then for a bogus IRS charge. But the ministry miraculously came back even stronger. And so in 2008, they had to raid him again, using the FBI, the CIA, all these agencies. That's why I'm saying this story explains both how they control our foreign policy and how they want to control the Protestants and get rid of Protestant Christianity in this country. So they labeled this man, falsely convicted him of crimes he didn't commit as a child abuser, accusing him of exactly what they do in pedophilia. And we know the rampant pedophilia in the world now, and the Vatican and the Catholic Church. When there was I watched this case. It was a travesty of justice. Now, to show you this, I pulled this old, a lot of times I tell you, YouTube stops or manipulates certain websites, and mine is one of them because they know what I talk about. And so what happens, though, people take my interviews, and I'll go to an interview I did, and it gets very little hits, and then I'll go to one that somebody else puts up under another name, and they get 50 to 70, 100,000 hits, even more. And I remember one time I looked at one of my videos and it had 38,000 hits in 2 days. The next day I went, it had 380. So give me a break, because people look at that and they go, well, if it's got a lot of hits, it must be good to listen to. And they know that if they see one with few hits, and it's really interesting, a lot of the Vatican stuff doesn't get its play. But anyway, I found this, somebody had picked up part of an interview I did with Tony Alamo, and he was warned by a government agent in July of 2007 that there was going to be a big raid on his ministry. So I thought we'd go back and listen to what Tony had to say, because it tells you why they want to not only destroy America, but also Christianity as a whole, and anyone who comes up against the Jesuit or Vatican agenda. Here it is from that 2007 interview. Here we go. See if I can get this.
2 days ago, I got a letter from a person that has been on Greg's show several times. His name is John Peeler, formerly a government agent. He was with the FBI, BATF, and other government agents, and has stated that he was warning me about, because he was hired at one time to assassinate me because of the way that I've been uncovering different government agents. So the Vatican, who the government agents are working for, so we don't have the United States government anymore. They've done away with our U.S. Constitution, and therefore, really, the freedoms of the United States have been pretty much taken away from us. But anyway, I received a letter from John Peeler warning me that they were going to try to make it look like an accident. My bus was at a bus repair shop in around Nashville, Tennessee. It had been there for 3 months. They kept saying that there was something else wrong with it, and my driver brought the bus in today, and it was early this morning, and the brakes went out on him while he was on the freeway, and the whole bus was totaled. And I asked him, why you not check the bus brakes before you left? He said, well, because it's brand new brakes. So he's stating that they must have snipped some kind of cable in there for them to go out. And the steady bumping down the road. Let me have that letter from John Peeler where he states that he's warning me that they're going to try to make it look like an accident because he's privy to a lot of the different government agents that are warning him to warn me. He states that many of them are still communicating with him, and they have recently, or some of them a few years ago, stopped listening to, they don't work for the government any longer, and they flew him in as to the things that that they're doing right now. So I'm going to have a young lady that's here to read this letter to you so that you can hear. This just came to him about 2 days ago. Okay, go ahead and read what he has to say here in the letter.
Pastor Tony Alamo from John G. Peeler regarding a warning. Dear Pastor Alamo, the True Church of Christ. A couple of years ago, FBI Violent Crime Task Force agents, New World Order jackbooted thugs, gave me a polygraph test and intense questions. They asked questions about you and your ministry in radio talk shows.
Well, they're doing the same thing to Buster. The FBI raided his furniture store here in Texarkana, and they took over I think it was $180,000. Buster will be here in just a minute or so, and they took 1/3 of his inventory. He has a big 100,000 square foot furniture store, and they told him that all this persecution that they're doing to him would go away if only he would just stop going to my church. So this is what they did to John Peeler. They told him to assassinate me, but if he wouldn't, that they would put his son in prison. Well, he's been in prison for a lot of years right now. I believe it's at least 7, and they said they gave him life for a murder that they've never found a body for. There's no such there's no existence of anybody whatsoever. They have no evidence or anything like that. And so Sanford is my driver. Sanford, tell the radio audience, did you just hear the letter did you finish this letter here? Okay, finish the letter that this John Peeler, who was the former FBI agent, and was asked to assassinate him because the fact that he did it with his son in prison. He's been there for over 7 years. Finish it off.
The FBI agents gave me the impression that you are still a target of interest. Please be careful. Mr. Gordon.
Please be careful. Why should I be so afraid of my own government? Why should I be so worried about my own government wanting to kill me, to assassinate me? Why would I be have to be so careful about such things? I can't continue on.
Mr. Gordon Call, the posse comitatus tax protester, was shot to death in Smithville, Arkansas in 1983.
Now, a lot of these people that he mentioned, I don't know anything about them, and maybe some of them should have been arrested, but certainly not murdered like the government murdered the people over at Waco, Texas. They said they make up false stories. The government makes up false stories about people in the ministry, and they say that they were being abused. What could be more abusive than murdering the children? I would think that if a person was being spanked or if they were being chastened by parents, which they were not at Waco, because I know a lot of people there after I was put in prison on false charges for false tax evasion or, tax fraud charges. I was tax exempt. And I know the people, a lot of them were in prison with that were at Waco, and they said none of those things were true. And I also know a drummer that used to go over to David Koresh's place, and he said he a judge. I won that trial in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And there's people putting out pictures of me with a tie-dye T-shirt on when they first arrested me in Tampa, Florida. And but they say, look, and here's this criminal, but they don't say that I was acquitted on those charges in Fort Smith, Arkansas, by a full jury. Not one of them believed anything that the government was saying about me.
Okay, so in that interview that Tony gave out, it went on to state Peeler named names of agents, his bosses who told him to assassinate Tony. And the story goes on. Right now, Tony's been sitting in jail on a 175-year sentence for over almost a decade, and I'm in the process of working on a petition that's out online. You can go to freeTonyAlamo.com, and then we're working up a writ, and we're going to present it to the pardon attorney of Trump when that attorney's placed in his position. I believe the Obama attorney is still there. Then we're going to present that to him to try to commute Tony's sentence, and hopefully that will be successful. Trump has come up and said he wants to help Christians, and so here's one way he can, and we'll see if he lives up to some of his campaign promises. This is a perfect case to do it. Now, getting back to the original story in the beginning I stated, I wanted to get rid of the chaos, the confusion, and I think I've done that by stating, look at these facts regarding who the Pope really is and how the leadership of the world works under him and what they have planned for us. I believe now we have a window of opportunity here in America for those of us who want to get to the truth to understand it before the next major conflict comes. And like I said earlier, I hope it doesn't, but all signs lead up to it. So go to my website at arcticbeacon.com. You can also get more information about Tony Alamo at freeTonyAlamo.com. And come back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal. Thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.